The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, the only podcast which is devoted to .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, EF Core, Signal-R, and not forgetting the .NET Core community itself. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogaman Taylor, and this is episode 42, ASP.NET Core FAQs. In this episode, we will answer some of the most frequently asked questions about ASP.NET Core. Some of the topics in this episode have already been covered in other episodes of the podcast. The transcription of this episode, available at .NETCore.show and linked in your podcatcher's show notes, contains links to those other episodes. Be sure to click through in order to find out more. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. ASP.NET Core is a rapidly evolving technology which can be used to create web applications from SPAs, or single-page applications, to traditional MVC or Model View Controller style applications, and from web APIs to WebAssembly-based apps. As you can tell, there's a lot to learn about with respect to ASP.NET Core, even if you aren't new to .NET development. So I thought I'd cover a few of the most frequently asked questions that I have been asked about ASP.NET Core. These questions range from beginners topics all the way up to advanced stuff. So let's dive right in. Question 1. So what is ASP.NET Core? Andrew Locke, in his ASP.NET Core in Action book, says that ASP.NET Core is the latest evolution of Microsoft's popular ASP.NET Web Framework, released in June 2016. ASP.NET Core makes significant architectural changes that rethink the way that the web framework is designed and built. ASP.NET Core is a rewrite of the ASP.NET Web Application Framework using .NET Core, allowing for a more streamlined and cross-platform set of APIs for creating modern web applications. As it is based on .NET Core, it is inherently cross-platform, whereas ASP.NET was locked to Windows only. Question 2. Can ASP.NET Core run on .NET Framework? Whilst only supported until August 21st, 2021, ASP.NET Core 2.1 can run on a .NET Framework base. Usually, ASP.NET Core is added as a NuGet package to a .NET Core application. However, version 2.1 of the ASP.NET Core NuGet packages can still be added to .NET Framework 4.x applications. The reason for this is that ASP.NET Core 2.1 was originally designed as a stepping stone release to allow developers who are using .NET Framework to start migrating smaller services over to .NET Core. Question 3. What can you create with ASP.NET Core? As mentioned earlier, ASP.NET Core is a modern web application framework. The latest version of ASP.NET Core, as of the time of writing this episode, has support for building SPAs using Angular, React, and Vue, traditional MVC applications, static websites, web APIs, and WebAssembly via Blazor applications. As you may be able to tell from the above list, ASP.NET Core supports the building of the majority of different web applications in use today. Not only that, ASP.NET Core supports both HTTP and gRPC transports. So if you're looking at using gRPC, ASP.NET Core is worth looking into. Question 4. Does ASP.NET Core use HTTP.sys? ASP.NET used a library called http.sys to enable HTTP communications between IIS, that's Internet Information Services, and an ASP.NET application running on a Windows server. However, since ASP.NET Core is cross-platform and http.sys is a Windows-only library, this is not available when serving an ASP.NET Core application from a Linux or macOS host. Microsoft have an entire support page on docs.microsoft.com, check the episode transcription for a link, which explains why you may want to use http.sys, such as Windows authentication, port sharing, HTTPS with SNI, HTTP2 when serving from Windows 10 or later, and a few more. Question 5. Where can ASP.NET Core applications be hosted? Whilst ASP.NET applications could only be hosted on Windows servers running IIS or on Azure, ASP.NET Core applications can be hosted on either Windows, Linuxes, or Mac OS. This allows you to host your web applications on a number of different servers running different operating systems. For instance, any of my ASP.NET Core applications can be hosted on a Windows server with either IIS, Nginx, or Apache, a Linux server with either Nginx or Apache, a Mac OS server with either Nginx or Apache, or cloud infrastructure providers like DigitalOcean, Linode, Azure, AWS, GCP, or Netlify. Netlify is a bit of a special case as it requires a little bit more effort to set up, but can be done. In fact, updated versions of my talk Blazor You Want to Run .NET Where includes me showing how this can be done. As such, you don't necessarily need a web server in the traditional on-premises sense. Question 6. How does Blazor relate to ASP.NET Core? At NDC Oslo 2017, Steve Sanderson gave a talk called Web Apps Can't Really Do That, Can They?, where he showed off an early build of a project that he'd started called Blazor. This was actually based on an earlier open source project called .NET Anywhere, which had been abandoned on August 31st of the same year. For those who don't know, Blazor is a way of running .NET applications within the browser using the browser's DOM as a UI for the application. Blazor is actually composed of two parts, server-side Blazor and client-side Blazor. With server-side Blazor, a SignalR connection is created between the browser and your server. When a user raises an event, i.e. they click on a button or navigate within your app, a message is sent back to the server via that SignalR connection. The server calculates the new markup and sends over a diff of the markup back to the browser. In this instance, all of the heavy lifting is done on the server and only the UI changes are sent back to the client. From a 10,000 foot viewpoint, this is similar to how RESTful APIs and MVC applications work. Client-side Blazor is a little different in that all of the code required to run your application, including the .NET code itself, is downloaded to the browser, and it is started via a WebAssembly build of the Mono runtime. This means that your entire application is running inside the browser, and that there is a large amount of data required to be downloaded in order to start the application. Putting that to one side, Blazor is as much a part of ASP.NET Core as MVC, Web API, and Razor are. As such, if you aren't using Blazor, then it won't be included in your app's binaries. Question 7. Do I have to use ASP.NET Core for microservices? Because ASP.NET was tied to both the Windows operating system and the .NET framework, using it required the presence of both of those, which meant that an install from an ASP.NET application was in the gigabytes, as it was essentially a monolithic application and required the presence of that specific operating system. Work has been done by Microsoft to create Docker images which are as small as possible, but these images are still in the hundreds of megabytes. Whereas both .NET Core and ASP.NET Core are both built from the ground up to be cross-platform and modular, meaning that if you're not using part of the runtime, then it won't be included in the install binaries. This means that your ASP.NET Core applications will be smaller than the .NET Framework version. Although this sits well with the cloud-native idea of being able to scale out applications as quickly as possible by spinning up replications of key parts of those systems as microservices, ASP.NET Core doesn't require you to write your applications as microservices. In fact, many large projects like Orchard Core and even Umbraco have started migrating to ASP.NET Core, and neither of those are microservices. A few of my open source web applications are built in ASP.NET Core and were not designed as microservices either. Some examples are DW Check API, which is an ASP.NET Core web API with EF Core as a data source, the Discworld Disorganizer, which is an ASP.NET Core SPA using Angular, and PokeBlazor, which is an ASP.NET Core web application using Blazor. Wrapping up. Those are some of the most frequent questions that I'm asked about ASP.NET Core. I hope that I've answered these questions clearly and concisely enough for you. However, if I've missed a question that you would like answering, please don't hesitate to get in contact via Twitter. I'm at .NETcore.show, my DMs are indeed open, and I'll try to answer them. Remember to check the show notes for a full transcription of the episode, links to any resources, Also for a discount code good for 40% off of Andrew Locke's book and any other book released by Manning, all of which are available at .NETcore.show. Check out the show notes in your podcatcher for a direct link. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice, and to come back next time for some more .NET Core goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.